Thanksgiving is a holiday that is celebrated over in the United States, with many Americans feasting and celebrating on the day. However, sometimes people are killing, dying, or vanishing. Creepy Thanksgiving crimes are unfortunately a ghastly tradition on the day as well. These are 10 crimes and disappearances that remain unsolved that occurred on Thanksgiving. Number 10. Hijacker D.B. Cooper disappeared in the sky on Thanksgiving Eve. The only unsolved case of hijacking and air piracy in US history happened the night before Thanksgiving in 1971. A guy calling himself Dan Cooper, later called DB by the media for unknown reasons but the name stuck, boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305 in Portland, bound for Seattle. Mid-flight, he revealed to the flight attendant that he had a bomb on his carry-on bag and promptly conducted the most polite hijacking ever. He got the plane to land in Seattle and demanded $200,000 in cash and 2 sets of parachutes. After these demands were met by the airline and the FBI, Cooper released the passengers and instructed the flight crew to take off and head for Mexico City. Shortly after this flight had begun, Cooper sent the flight attendant to the cockpit for safety, strapped on one of the parachute sets, and opened the plane's rear stairs and jumped out into legend. No trace of Cooper was ever found. Some of the money he stole was recovered from a forest outside of Portland many years later, but the man himself and his true identity remain a mystery to this day. Cooper became a legend and folk hero because of his boldness and polite demeanor, and the FBI gave up looking for him altogether, closing the case on Cooper in 2009 without ever having solved it. Number 9. Shane Montgomery might have been a victim of the smiley face killer. The popular smiley face killer theory claims that a cabal of serial murderers are operating across the United States, targeting white male students, dumping their bodies in the rivers, lakes or ponds to erase all physical evidence, and drawing a smiley face at the dump site in order to taunt the police. These deaths are normally written off as drunken drownings, but proponents of the theory maintain that there are remarkable similarities among the victims that can't be accounted for by mere chance. One of the smiley face cabal's possible victims was Shane Montgomery, a Westchester University student who disappeared from the streets of Philadelphia during Thanksgiving of 2014. His body was discovered several days later in the Schuylkill River, and his death was ruled accidental drowning by the medical examiner. But circumstances of his death, who if anyone he met after leaving a bar at 2 a.m, how he wound up in the river to begin with, remains shrouded in mystery, lending credence to the proponents of the smiley face killer theory. Number 8. The Blount family was killed by a briefcase bomb on Thanksgiving Day. The Blount family of Lake Worth, Texas were returning from a Thanksgiving outing in 1985 when 15-year-old daughter Angela Blount found a briefcase on the porch of their mobile home. When opened, the briefcase exploded, killing Angela, her father, and her cousin Michael Columbus. 10 years later, a man named Michael Toney was convicted of the crime, but his conviction was overturned because the prosecution withheld evidence that contradicted the witness testimony and exonerated Toney. Some have speculated the Blounts weren't the intended targets of the mystery bomber, and that the device was intended for one of their neighbours instead. Nonetheless, no further evidence has been produced in the case, and the entire affair remains a total mystery. Number 7. Rapper Soulja Slim was gunned down the night before Thanksgiving. New Orleans-based rapper Soulja Slim, whose real name was James Tapp, was on the verge of mega fame when his life was cut short by a gunman on Thanksgiving Eve 2003. Though a suspect was arrested, who claimed he had been hired to kill Tapp for $10,000, the case was dropped due to a lack of witnesses. Tapp's murder remains officially unsolved, including the identity of the person who hired the alleged hitman. Soulja's song Slow Motion, a collaboration with Juvenile, became a Billboard #1 hit 6 months later. Number 6. Teenager Karen Mitchell vanished without a trace on Thanksgiving. Karen Marie Mitchell disappeared from Eureka, California on Thanksgiving 1997. She was off school for the holiday and had just left her place of employment and stopped by a shoe store owned by her aunt and legal guardian, Annie Casper. Karen visited briefly with Casper, then headed home to prepare for the holiday festivities, but she never made it there. A witness claims he saw Karen get into a blue sedan driven by an older white man shortly after leaving the mall where her aunt worked. This man has never been identified, though two high-profile suspects were examined in connection to the case. The first was convicted murderer Wayne Adam Ford, who fit the witness's description of Karen's kidnapper. Although he confessed to several murders, Ford denied any involvement in Karen's case, with the police never being able to tie the crime to him. The second suspect was Robert Durst, who was subject of a recent HBO documentary called The Jinx. Durst appears to have visited Casper's store several times and was in Eureka the day that Karen had disappeared, but like Ford, police were unable to definitively link Durst to the crime. Karen's fate as of this day still remains unknown. Number 5. The Thanksgiving murder of a prominent Portland attorney. At first glance, the Thanksgiving death of Portland, Oregon public defender Nancy Bergeson looked like natural causes. There were no signs of trauma or other marks on her body, which was discovered in her living room, but an autopsy determined that she had been strangled to death with a soft object, possibly a scarf, on Thanksgiving Day 2009. The circumstances of her murder are unknown, and because police initially acted on the assumption that her death had been natural, crucial evidence was likely lost from the crime scene in the early days of the investigation. Her case remains open, with a high probability of her case never being solved. Number 4. The murder of Beth Lynn Barr. On Thanksgiving 1977, 6-year-old Beth Lynn Barr was walking home from school in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania to spend the holiday with her family, but she never arrived. Because Beth's father was a local cop, the police leapt immediately into action when Beth didn't come home, but it was all to no avail as Beth was never found. A witness later reported seeing Beth being carried into a blue sedan driven by an older white man, and the car was traced to a local rental agency. But the agency's records show that the car had not been loaned out that day. It was possible that the perpetrator had stolen the car for use in his crime and returned it to the agency before anyone noticed it was gone. Sadly, Beth's skeletal remains were discovered in a shallow, unmarked grave near Monroeville, Pennsylvania 2 years later. She had been stabbed several times in the chest. Her killer currently remains at large with his identity unknown. Number 3. Shots through a curtain window killed 2 people during a Thanksgiving dinner. Shortly after 10 p.m. on Thanksgiving 2002, an unknown assailant fired shots through the curtained windows of Joseph and Evangeline Britt's home in Tacoma, Washington. The Britts had been hosting a large Thanksgiving dinner gathering with about 25 people attending. When the shooting stopped, 2 of those people, 19-year-old Kimberly Riley and 5-year-old Jeremy Britt, were dead. 2 other attendees were wounded but survived their injuries. Witnesses reported seeing a man with dark hair fleeing the scene in a pickup truck, but he was never identified, and his motive for firing to a house full of Thanksgiving revelers remain a mystery. Number 2. A Pennsylvania birdwatcher makes a grisly discovery on Thanksgiving. Many people enjoy spending time in nature on Thanksgiving, but for one woman in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, this time of peace and serenity was interrupted by a very grisly discovery. She had spent the day at her boyfriend's home indulging her passion for birdwatching while there, but what she at first thought was a heron in Neshaminy Creek turned out to actually be a pair of sneakers, and those sneakers were attached to the decomposing body of a black male, wedged between some other creek's rocks. The man appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s and was wearing Tommy Hilfiger clothing. And that's the most anyone seems to know about him. To this day, both his identity and cause of death remain unknown. Number 1. The unsolved murder of John H. Woodruff. One of the oldest unsolved Thanksgiving murders occurred over a century ago in Schenectady County, New York. John H. Woodruff was a game protector for the county and left his home on Thanksgiving Day of 1919 to patrol the area and never returned. His body was found almost 2 years later in April 1921, buried in a shallow grave near a creek bed. The top half of Woodruff's skull had been detached, indicating he had been killed by a blow from a large object, possibly an axe. Woodruff's wife claimed he had received then destroyed a threatening letter a few months before his disappearance, and a witness reported seeing Woodruff arguing with another man on the day in question. Woodruff and the man then walked off together into the woods. It was the last time anyone saw Woodruff alive. No suspect or motive was ever identified in Woodruff's case, and after 100 years, his murder has remained unsolved.